Kia ora tātou, welcome to our audience, and thanks to Carl Pickens for being here today. We're running this event live and live stream, so we have a virtual audience today. My name's Meg Liptrot. I'm the Education Coordinator for Eco Matters, and I run the gardens here as well. So welcome everybody. A little bit about our speaker. Carl studied landscape architecture before travelling widely and setting up his own design practice here in Auckland. He spent a lot of his childhood in Kawau Island as well, and that's where he developed his love of nature and gardening and also architecture because he was in Auckland. So he studied at Lincoln, and he also studied sustainable horticulture and helped manage a biodynamic farm down there as well. This has given him valuable insights for managing productive landscapes in an efficient way. Carl's run a number of workshops here at Eco Matters over the years, from food forests to making your own seed raising mix. He's awesome, and really looking forward to this workshop because it's an area that I'm passionate about. In 2019, Carl was awarded a fellowship from the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust to study world-leading practice in urban agriculture projects and policies in Europe and the UK. This was to help illustrate how the incorporation of urban agriculture in New Zealand's urban design and planning can contribute to a more sustainable future. This presentation gives us a chance to see and hear about some of the special urban garden projects around the world, and hopefully inspire more action in New Zealand. The role of urban gardens can't be underestimated as we work towards climate responsive cities with localisation of food while fostering community engagement and empowerment. With more and more of us being disconnected from our food and where it comes from, and the intensification of urban living, we need to prioritise and value these spaces and make them permanent fixtures in our communities. This trip's a dream project in my book, and a good excuse to connect with some impressive urban gardens and gardeners. Thanks everyone.
So I was just saying that in 2017 I was doing some work with Kaumana Trust, Kaumana Urban Farm in Auckland. And the chair at the time, Mary Paul, she encouraged me to apply for a Churchill Fellowship, which I duly did, and I applied for study in urban agriculture in Central and Western Europe. So I was accepted, and in 2019, July, I flew to Europe to embark on a fellowship. I spent 10 weeks in Europe. It was pretty intense 10 weeks. I went to 7 countries, visited about 16 or 17 projects. And actually, as part of the fellowship, I had to submit an itinerary in terms of where I would go, how much money I would spend, et cetera, et cetera. And really, as soon as I got to Europe, the itinerary went out the window. And I was sort of just guided, directed, pointed from project to project. Now, pointer, as part of the, okay, it might help if I turn that on. No, doesn't help. Tech assist.
Yeah. Take on the way. Yep.
All right, cool. Now, there's a bit of text here, but this is just a bit of context in terms of what I was thinking about prior to going. I did a bit of research into urban agriculture in Europe. I was looking at the sorts of contributions I thought urban agriculture could make to sustainable cities and more sustainable communities. I was looking at kind of physical aspects like food waste and reduction of food miles and carbon capture in the soil, and also I was looking at community resilience and how urban agriculture might contribute to that. and I was interested in some context around studies that have been done in Europe, which shows that urban agriculture is often a tool through which other sort of social programs can operate. I just missed an exhibition actually in Paris prior to leaving, which I would have loved to have gone to. It was an exhibition on agricultural concepts for the city of Paris, and it was a whole bunch of agronomists and architects and landscape architects and urban planners, etc., who argued for the metropolitan area of Paris to embrace something called agricultural urbanism. And they were arguing that basically for Paris to avoid the sort of social calamities and environmental calamities that they see coming, that they would need to transform the metropolitan area of Paris into a porous, diverse and interactive habitat where agriculture permeates the experience of the people, plants and animals that live there. I just love that sentence. No, tech help. Quentin, I'm having some difficulty with the pointer. It's not working. For some reason. Yeah? Yeah?
It's working?
Working now?
Right.
Yeah. Okay, I'll keep going. The UN in 2008, after the GFC, there was the UN. There was a number of issues around the world in relation to food security, and the UN released some policy in relation to encouraging removing barriers and providing incentives for urban environments to help reduce the pressure on food prices. In the lockdowns we had last year, we had just a massive increase in demand for food parcels. Christchurch, threefold increase, Wellington, 400% increase. Actually, I'm doing some work with Ngā Whare Waitea Marae and Mangere, and they're a satellite station of the Auckland Bank, brought about 7,000 people a week. That swelled to 30,000 in COVID. They were completely over. They have a big marae. They have 5 acres of MSD land adjacent to the marae, which is earmarked for housing. And so they're going to be interested in how that can be, housing project can be developed now around a sustainable food infrastructure. So it's really quite topical at the moment. Interestingly, this is something I didn't know, but food security is like an issue. And there was a study done in 2015-16, the household food security by the Ministry of Health. So there are 917,000 kids up to the age of 14 in 2015-16. And of those, 1 in 5 are experience food insecurity. Now that can also be nutritional insecurity, like eating crap food, basically. Take that 907,000, you divide it by 5, you get about 180,000, and 1 in 3 are Māori, so grossly overrepresented. So I'm going to kick straight into projects now. This is Parked. This is a rooftop farm in Antwerps, about a 20-minute walk from Antwerp's central train station. I was really inspired by this project. What it is it's a series of old industrial buildings, and there were 3 entrepreneurs, one of them, this guy Stefan, and his 2 colleagues, and they bought these old industrial buildings, and they had a vision to create to turn them into a creative entrepreneurial hub. So what they did is, instead of pouring money into retrofitting the buildings, they farm. So they got in touch with a guy called Bram. He's part of this vegetable farmers cooperative in the Belgium area, Antwerp area, And they paid him 50% of full salary for a year to conduct growing experiments. So that was experiments with different types of meat, watering techniques, growing techniques. So they did that for a year, and then they decided, yeah, would be productive, and so then they poured money into developing the rooftop. You can see on the left-hand picture 3 really quite large glass houses that have been anchored to structural points on the roof. So this roof has been engineer assessed, or rooftops need to be engineer assessed. A lot of these rooftops in Europe are actually quite old and can't take a lot of weight. But the assessment on this rooftop was 200 kilograms per meter squared. So if you can imagine, that's like 3 people in a so that influence they grow and where they grow on the rooftop. They can't put a lot of weight through the middle of the rooftops. Any structures need to be pivoted on structural points. But what Bram did to get around this, actually, before I get into that, I'll just mention that when this was being built, they had so much media attention that businesses and creatives just flocked to the buildings wanting to lease space and work from there. Now they have coffee roasteries at ground level, they have pizzerias, restaurants, they've got a gym, tons of creatives in the building. On the top of the roof, people who work in the building can actually garden on the roof. So they have a community garden space that functions on the rooftop. And it's really quite attractive for businesses because they can take people up, clients up there for meetings, and clients just love it. They actually have a kitchen area for the community garden where they can go up and make tea and food, fire pit, pizza. They even have a sauna and a hot tub up there. So they're all about, fun and enjoyment. It operates as a CSA. Do you all know what a CSA is? Some do, some don't. Okay, cool. So a CSA, that's a for community supported agriculture. Now, CSAs were set up to bypass retailers and distributors in terms of food distribution. So they connect the consumer directly with the grower. The idea being that the consumer would bear some of the burden if there was an adverse weather event, for example, and you got crop loss, then the farmer wouldn't lose their land or their business. So typically, if you belong to a CSA, you front up with a lump sum up front, and then through an entire growing season, you get, for example, a weekly harvest. Often, and usually, in fact, CSA members goes to these farms sort of once a week, and they help do a bit of a working bee. Sometimes it's a pick your own harvest, they harvest sort of scenario. But I differentiate CSAs from veggie box schemes. They're not veggie box schemes, they're lump summed up front to help sort of share that burden in case catastrophic things happen for the farmer. So the CSA members, they pay €50 a month to be able to harvest from the roof and be able to go to the roof and hang out there. And they also, as part of that, they learn to grow food in a 1 year internship program. So Bram teaches them once a month over a course of a year the basic organic growing techniques. And at the end of a year, then they can then choose to continue. They can pay 50% of, so €25 a month. But in return, they have to then teach workshops to people coming through. So Bram's trying to solve this problem, which you often get in projects where one person's sort of holding space and the project falls over because they burn out or leave. So I thought that was quite nifty. They do twice weekly harvest for restaurants in Antwerp, and the gardens. The way Bram has, in part, resolved this issue of loading on the rooftop is to build around the edges. So the edges can take a lot more weight. So they built raised beds at the edges, and they made them look quite nice with these rustic palings all around. And what's behind the rustic palings are these recycled sugar containers. So you'll see a top and a bottom container there. The top container has media and veggies growing out of it. It's irrigated. The bottom container has water, so rainwater that comes in and percolates through. You can't see it here, but that geotextile periodically goes through the top container and into the bottom. And the idea of that is that the soil is watered passively through capillary action. Water is just drawn up into the vegetable bed above. And those sugar containers are recycled from a sugar manufacturer in Holland somewhere. Now, the whole idea of this rooftop is that it's low tech, so readily available materials, cheap, so that anyone can sort of reproduce it. Now, all the water that hits the rooftop in this farm goes through the garden beds and through a geotextile, and then through a geogrid, a spatial geogrid, runs off and eventually ends up in a 100,000 litre water tank that's buried under the courtyard at ground level. Then that water is pumped back up and reticulated to irrigate the gardens above. Okay, I think we move on. Next slide. Oh, that's camera's in the way, but that's the one on the bottom left is the community garden area. There's like a little kitchen on the left there, and there are seating areas here where people can have meetings. You see inside the glass house, it's pretty lush. Antwerp's pretty cold climate. Can't grow much for a couple of months a year. In particular, it's covered in snow, although less and less so now, apparently. So what they also do is they grow in hay bales. Now, hay bales are pretty lightweight. Just another way they're solving the loading issue. And they get the whole hay bales fresh. And when they're fresh, they have quite a good carbon to nitrogen ratio. So they heat up for a week or so, then they cool down. And once they hit 20 degrees, they add, in planting pockets, they add compost and they plant in there. And you can see zucchini and phacelia and all sorts in here. And then once they've got a crop out of it, they compost the hay bales. So it's not a permanent feature, it's really lightweight, it solves this problem of loading. They have chickens on the roof, and they have a little aquaculture system. That's watercress growing in clay balls. I brought some clay balls to show you, which I'll pass around. They're manufactured little ceramic clay balls with little holes in them, which the roots get into. There's actually carp in the tubs underneath, and a pump which reticulates water back and forth. So the nitrogen, the poop from the carp, is feeding the watercress. And actually, restaurants at ground level come and feed some of their food scraps to the carp because they eat food scraps. Yeah. It was a really interesting project, and I really like the attention to aesthetics in this as well. Like, it's actually beautiful to look at. Move on to the next project. This is Losate in Oslo in Norway. This is a really neat organic farm on about 1 hectare. It's on reclaimed land. It's also about a 20-25 minute walk from central Oslo. And this project was founded by an infrastructure group called in combination with the Future Farmers Arts Collective. So this infrastructure group, Borvika Utvikling, they have a regulatory requirement to contribute a proportion of their profits to art projects. So this has been set up as like a combination of art and organic food production. Now, when being on reclaimed land, there was bugger all soil on the site when they started. It's actually over the top of like a car tunnel, vehicle tunnel. They put out a call to organic farmers in Oslo for soil. Said, we need soil, can you help? And about 50 farmers replied and said, yep, sweet ass, we'll bring soil. So they did. And what they did, they had a symbolic procession through the center of Oslo with of soil, took it out to site. They laid it all out, and you can see online the photos and the soil. It's amazing, like some brown and red, and the soil all has these different hues and tones and colors. It's quite beautiful. And they laid it out on site. Then they signed a soil declaration. And the soil declaration basically says that this site will be protected in perpetuity for the purposes of art and act related to organic food production. Pretty funky. Another significant event in the history of Loseta was a few years in. So it's all operating with volunteer time at this point. And a few years in, the Flatbread Society, another one of these cool societies in Norway, built a bakehouse. So traditionally in Norway, back in the day, maybe still, I'm not sure, but not so much, I think. They had these bakehouses where they would harvest grains in summer and autumn, process them and bake these like hard breads with holes in the middle. They're like discs, and hang them up in bakehouses to winter. So this is built in the tradition of bakehouse. It's in the form of a Viking ship, like a Viking ship that's supported and under construction. It's a beautiful structure inside. It really is gorgeous, just gorgeous curved timber. And there's earth ovens inside. Now, and the Flatbread Society, by the way, is a combination of, it's a whole bunch of interesting groups of people. There's astronomers, builders, poets, growers. So they have this, every Wednesday, people come for a big working bee on the farm, and they get like 30, 40 odd people typically. People do a big working bee, they bake bread, they cook a big meal, and they have a big feast outside. It's about a hectare. They're quite limited in terms of how much money they can make off the farm. Initially, the first farmer was hired in 2016. The infrastructure company, well, no, it was a Norwegian Organic Farmers Union hired the first farmer in combination with the infrastructure group. And then in 2019, the city of Oslo took over, and now they hire 2 farmers. They took over because it was so popular and successful. Still, you know, the farmers' salaries are still reliant on funding from the council, but they're now expanding into a neighboring hotel, growing in the basement, growing on the rooftop, and in an attempt to create more income. They're just limited in terms of size here. And the hotel they're growing in is getting tons of media exposure and subsequently, yeah. So that's Loseta. Next project is in Todmorden in England. It's about half an hour northeast of Manchester. I fell in love with Todmorden. I didn't feel in love in Todmorden. I fell in love with Todmorden. I just love this place. It's it's an old mill town. Very traditional, very beautiful old stone buildings. It's got locks. It's got a lock system running behind the town, which they used to transport fabric from the mills all the way into Manchester. 28 miles of lock system that actually goes over a mountain pass, over a mountain range. You can get your head around that. So in 2008, Todmorden was having a lot of problems around the time of the GFC. So they were having a lot of social problems. They're having a lot of drug and alcohol issues. They're having a lot of shops closing down in town. People were struggling with income and experiencing some food insecurity. So local residents and these 2 women, Pamela Warhurst and Mary Clare, got together and decided, well, what can we do? We can grow food in public spaces and create a sense of community and try and do something really positive. So that's what they did. And they started field sites and ugly little strips in town, and ripping out privileges which the council had planted and planting perennials like berries and artichokes, and they didn't ask permission. They just did it. In England, you don't really do that. And so they had a, there was a big uproar, big kerfuffle. Some people liked it, some people were against it. But because they went into ugly spaces and they didn't go into publics with lawns where people would play, and they went into marginal kind of areas, ugly strips, and they maintained it, kept it looking nice, that people, they got more and more support over time, and eventually the council came on board. But a little bit, just going back, a little bit about the incredible edible Todmorden model. So the incredible edible model revolves around this idea of 3 spinning plates. The first plate is community, and the idea being that we grow food in public spaces, can harvest this food, and with the idea being to transform people's relationship to where it comes from and to the environment in general. The second plate business is about supporting local food businesses, so producers, distributors, niche food product makers, etc. And it's also about vegetable tourism. So the IET brand is an income generator, and they do a lot of tours, and they do like 5-6 tours a week in summer, and actually that's where their income comes from and talks. So they used to get grant funding, but they stopped asking or for grant funding in 2012 because they saw organizations that were dependent on grant funding. So they said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. So they get income from speaking engagements and tours, and they have plants donated by local nurseries. They have, everyone gives their time voluntarily. And so the third plate, which I didn't mention, is learning. So that's embodying the first 2 plates by way of education and passing on skills. So yeah, today there are 120 incredible edible groups in the UK and over 700 worldwide. Oh, here we go. Yeah, so this is an example of a little space where there was a privet hedge where they were replaced with berries. This is a small edible garden right in the middle of town. I was there on one of the Sunday working bees. There's just this real incredible sense of joy, really, in the people doing this. It's pretty cool. And this is the long table where there's a big banquet after every Sunday working bee. And someone always cooks a huge meal, it's usually vegetarian, and no one has to pay anything. They buy a lot of the food's donated. They use their income from speaking engagements, etc., to buy food. So they have, every Sunday, they get about anywhere from 30 to 75 people come to work the edible beds around town, and they'll be over that by now, but they have 400 odd volunteers on their list. Yeah. Yeah. So a few stories, because they're great stories. So council was removing benches from around town and adjacent the stream or locks because undesirables were loitering there and drinking and shooting up and blah, blah, blah. So they ripped these benches, and IET were like, not doing that. We don't like that. It's not in the interest of our community. So they went and fabricated their own benches and bolted them to the ground so the council couldn't take them away. And they make them really, you know, like they make them really beautiful. They've got like insect hotels and signs. And this little avenue here called Pollination Street, this is a walkway that's about 60 meters long, and you walk through there to this indoor market in Todmorden, this very traditional English market. And Mary, I mean, she's got such gumption. She rung up the council and she said, look, you're missing a street sign. It's called Pollination Street. And if you send it to me, I'm really handy, I'll put it up for you. So no one in the council actually checked to see if Pollination Street exists. So they sent her the sign and she put it up in this edible sort of corridor here. One of my favorites is this protest they did. So there's a supermarket chain in England called Asda, and big supermarket chain. And they owned a site in town with two very old derelict buildings, and they weren't fenced off, and they're a little bit dangerous but really ugly, a real eyesore in the town. Now their intention was to build a supermarket there, but after the GFC that went out the window and they changed their mind. The site had just been sitting there for a few years. So IET said, look, you got to take these down. You know, this is an eyesore on our town. It's not in the interest of the community. We want you to take them down. So Asda refused, said, no, we're not doing that. It'll cost us money, we're not doing it. Then they approached council. Council refused. So they said, right, we're going to make a protest. So they built a massive clothesline outside these two buildings. And they put out a notice to everyone in the local area that said, Asda a pants, it's an English term, basically means Asda sucks, but Asda a pants, and if you think Asda a pants, come and hang your dirty linen on this washing line. So people did, in their hundreds, and what they mostly hung was their dirty knickers and undies. And then IET, they rung up the BBC and they said, look, something really weird is going on in Todmorden. People are hanging their dirty undies up all over town. So the BBC came down and they ran a story, published it on national news, embarrassed Asda so much that by the end of the month, Asda rung up IET and said, okay, look, you win. We're going to take the buildings down. We'll build you some raised beds outside. How many do you want? There's another building in Todmorden called the Todmorden Learning Centre. Now, it's a big old beautiful building. Well, beautiful in my eyes, you know, like historically, probably quite simple looking building if you live in England, but it had been sitting unoccupied for a long time, belonged to council. I forget what previously it was used for, some kind of learning or training centre. And the council was going to tear it down and give it to Asda as a car park. And it was going to cost £1 million to tear it down. And so IET stepped in and were like, well, look, this is a community asset. We don't want you to do this. So it's taken 2 years of a lot of negotiation, but it's been asset transferred to the community. And now it's being turned into engineering workshops, horticultural training, commercial kitchen, artists in residence. It's another cool story. They even have their own cycle tour. So just up the road in Hebden Bridge is where the actual Tour de France starts. And in Todmorden, they're like, actually, no, we're the first true town in West Yorkshire. It should start here. So they started their own cycle tour, and it goes up around the hills and people all wear LEDs and they have giant puppets going through town. So in 2017, 3 local academics from Manchester and Leicester, I think, universities, did a really detailed study on the net social return for investment. Now that's like this complex way of calculating benefit from not just financial contribution, but volunteer time and input. And they came to the conclusion that for every £1 invested, £5.5 was returned to the Todmorden community as a whole during 2016. And now, I mean, incredible Todmorden will say, look, this isn't totally down to us. Like, things have changed in terms of economy, etc. The town's fully tenanted. Lots of cool little businesses. People really want to live there now. And I'm going to play you 5 minutes of an interview with Mary Claire. I interviewed her. I'm doing a bit of umming and ahhing in this interview. I was a little bit starstruck. And I apologize for the swearing in advance. So just, okay.
To use this, please make sure your app is running and can access the internet.
And I think that is completely sustainable. And, you know, so many people worry about the rich. And so here you've got a fantastic example of drug users, alcoholics, people with low difficulties, depression, very rich people here too. But it doesn't work. To each other. So we're modelling, we're not really interested in urban agriculture. We're growing those foods to demonstrate kindness and money on it. That's the secret of surviving whatever is to come in the future.
I agree.
If you live in a kind town, you won't fall because people are there to pick you up. So you've seen yourself here. There's a lot of talking goes on, and you felt the power of our table.
I did, yeah.
It's beautiful,
It's
isn't
beautiful.
it, to feel the power of the table?
Really wonderful. Yeah.
And you know, this is only new to us. We didn't eat together afterwards,
Is that right?
and we had a quarter, less than a quarter of the people. And as soon as we started to eat together, boom. So people can come if they're hungry. They don't have to garden.
Yeah.
They can just come because they're lonely or hungry, or we've got a good cook on that day. So it works well.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you can just feel it.
You can feel it, can't you?
You can feel the joy.
You can feel joy because we don't do problem talk. We don't do, oh, fuck Trump. Oh, fuck Brexit.
Yeah.
Oh, fuck chemicals. We say, just hold on to hope. The world is in crisis, absolute crisis, and we must hold on to hope. So in our own way, we're absolutely activists, but we're activists for a kinder world. And I think some people think, you know, how are they doing that? You know, I got a letter yesterday, from someone with a project up the road saying, could you give me any tips about getting volunteers? So, and I really admire your work, but we've got nobody. So I said, come to Sunday gardening, because if you see in action, no one's shouting orders. Everyone's just, some people have walked off after their dinner. Some people wash up. Just trust that humans know what to do.
Yeah, that's Mary Claire. I'd slept in 8 different beds in 11 days before meeting her. I was deliriously tired. We're going to take a 5-minute break now. Yeah. Are we going through time that quickly? Leg stretch.
That kind of stuff. Toilet break if you need it. Back in 5 minutes.
Okay, welcome back. Oh, tech. We have the clicker playing up again. This ticker has issues. I'm going to come back to that. Right, next project in Germany. It's a gorgeous little town on the Rhine. It's about an hour and a half by train from Frankfurt in the direction of Holland. Beautiful train ride, just stunning. It's a town of about 30,000 inhabitants, and Andernach is called the edible town of Germany. Now, it's similar to Todmorden in that it's a project that involves growing food in public spaces in the town, but different to Todmorden in that it's a top-down approach as opposed to grassroots. So in 2008, a lot happened in 2008 around the GFC, interestingly. In 2008, a guy who works in the city planning office, and his name escapes me at the moment, and a local agronomist, they got together and banged heads and came up with this concept of growing food in public spaces in town. Now, their objective was to help people reconnect with food traditions, particularly in relation to this project, particularly through the growing of regionally specific heritage plants. Creating a tourism interest, and also this project helps long-term unemployed with vocational skills and training in horticulture with the aim to get them into eventual long-term work. So the council actually employs a few gardeners full-time to work with long-term unemployed in these gardens through town to help maintain them and teach them agronomy skills. Every year, the gardens have a different focus. So 2010, they had 101 tomato varieties, 2011, 100 bean varieties. When I was there in 2019, it was the year of the hops. And there are, in fact, hops everywhere I went in Europe. So these heritage varieties are really focused on that. The project is still very heavily reliant on government funding. I tried to pick a range of projects, some that were and some that won't. So just going back, for example, Puck, the rooftop garden, is independent of any grant or government funding. Todmorden as well operates as a grassroots, but it's also not a commercial enterprise as opposed to Puck. The Oslo farm reliant on council funding, this one reliant on council funding. But this one's interesting in that it's trying to sort of give long-term unemployed people an opportunity to learn new skills. So this, they have these beautiful gardens. They have this incredible old castle in Andernach. And in fact, Andernach, there's some debate between Andernach and another town, I don't know the name of, as to whether this is the oldest town in Germany, some 2,000 years old. I'm having serious issues with this pointer. But, huh? Yeah, maybe. Do you want to do that? Oh, I'm going to just say next. I turned it off.
Yeah, so now it's on.
Oops. Okay, that was me. Sorry.
Doing it?
No. All right. Yeah, we're good. We're good? We're back. Let me try next one. Okay. Yes, it's very sensitive. So I just love this structure. It's such a simple structure, but so impactful, you know, like in terms of the castle and this vertical scale that relates to the vertical scale of the castle. It's a designer in me just loving it. So these are hops growing with a strip of companion plants next door. So this project was so successful. They started with 10 tours in 2010. They're up to 100 tours in 2019, roughly. They've had to upskill local tour operators in kind of just some basics around organic vegetables in the gardens themselves so that they know what they're talking about. They were concerned with vandalism at the start, but they've had no significant vandalism in 10 years. And this is part of a wider EU project beyond so-called just nice community projects. So they're actually trying to go deeper into social and economic stuff. It's been so successful that the project expanded to a 14-hectare peri-urban permaculture farm in the neighbouring town of Ike. And it's a gorgeous walk from Andernach to Ike through these golden wheat fields you see everywhere in Germany. It's like a 40-minute walk. And at Ike, they employ refugees, particularly. They're interested in employing refugees, and they make a lot of niche products using these regionally specific plants. So the whole, together, these projects are still about 80% reliant on government and council funding and about 20% independent funding. And it's won a bunch of awards. You can go in the local tourism office and pick up one of these brochures, and they have all the edible gardens on there, and you can do like a walking tour around the town. So that's Andernach. I went to Paris. I was really interested in this project, Parisculteurs. So in 2014, the mayor of Paris initiated this project called Parisculteurs with the idea of greening Paris with 100 hectares of roof and wall gardens by 2020, 1/3 of which would be devoted to urban agriculture and productive gardens. So what they did is they assembled a whole bunch of experts. They had landscape architects, engineers, transport planners, surveyors, to identify an initial 40 sites with favorable criteria. Now, some of them were council buildings, some of them were private buildings, some of them were in school grounds. And they put out a call, they detailed all these sites, and they put out a call for project partners. They got 126 applications to do with these different sites, and they selected 33. So the city of Paris provided seed funding, and the amount of funding was dependent on whether it had a social focus, a commercial focus, was in a government building or a private building, et cetera, et cetera. Studies have shown that it's been proven to have increased food security for the urban poor in Paris. And it just keeps expanding. You can look it up online. There are really large scale rooftop gardens happening now in Paris, more proposed. Unfortunately, I couldn't get to a couple of the biggest ones when I was there because my timing was off. They were right in the middle of annual holidays, and I did get to a couple, and one being, this actually is Agro-Paris-Tech. So that's a horticultural training facility right in the middle of Paris. Outside this building, I was just like, it's like a building in the middle of Paris. How do they actually grow anything? But they do a lot of trips just outside the city to farms, et cetera, et cetera. But on the rooftop, they do have a garden. And since 2012, they've been experimenting with different techniques of growing on rooftops. And they've done a lot of experiments with different soil mixes to see what's lightweight and what works. Actually, their building could take 350 kgs per meter squared, so a little bit more weight here, but this rooftop's netted. You have to net them for the birds. And you get about a 3 degrees temperature rise on the rooftop compared to growing at ground level. And the most successful soil mixes they came up with contained a mixture of these manufactured clay balls, fine wood chips, coffee grounds, and green manures. I didn't ask what the green manures were, but I just assumed it was compost. I'm just going to pass around, actually. I bought a few of these little clay balls smuggled back through the border. But I mean, they're inert, so I don't think it matters. And the woman, the head of the school, was quite keen to point out that they planted the rosemary here on the rooftop, but all the other, there's a real biodiverse kind of weed and herbal kind of lay stuff that has all been bought by the birds. So Veni Verde is a gardening organisation in Paris. It's been supported since 2016 by the European Social Fund to develop micro farms in schools in Paris. And they're really interested in helping teach kids from a young age the challenges of food production and supply, about biodiversity, about where food comes from. And also a really important part of their kaupapa is to help prevent kids from leaving school early, because that's a real problem in some of the lower socioeconomic parts of Paris. So I visited the rooftop garden at Centre EDF School in the 18th, is anyone here French? Speak French? Arrondissement. Say that again? Thank you. So if you don't know Paris, it's split into these 20 segments or areas. This one was in the 18th. So this is a rooftop garden at a school. They have garden beds for the kids. It's netted to protect from the birds. They have an old toilet block at the end you can't see, but they raise plants inside there. Local nursery donates plants. They actually have a lot of interns coming and going in Veni Verde, so part of their mission is also to teach and skill people about growing food. They save seeds, blah, blah, blah. So that was a cool project. That's me helping them make a raised bed. But the one I was really inspired by was at the Pierre Mendès France School in the 20th arrondissement. And so this school had, so it welcomes children in difficult social situations. It has had major problems with violence, and so much so that back in before 2014, parents in the local area were refusing to send their kids there. A new principal came in 2014 and invited Veni Verde in to grow food on the school grounds. So the school grounds are fairly extensive, and they have a lot of food gardens on these grounds, like quite significant. And that was one program they started. They also have rabbits and chickens, animals that kids can interact with. So food growing on the grounds. But the other project that Veni Verde initiated was an animation project for the kids, so hand-drawn animation, where they learn, well, through the animation is to demonstrate the life cycle of a garden, the life cycle of plants. So these two projects together, they, one story was really telling. There was a kid who, there was a violent incident with a knife at school, and a kid was going to be expelled. Instead of being expelled, he was sent to work with the gardeners at Veni Verde in the school grounds for 2 months. I think for like 2 or 3 days a week. They gave him, he had a lot of one-on-one time with these gardeners. They kind of opened up about his life and his problems at home. They gave him a project. That's his seat. He built that seat, this little 10-year-old kid. And after a couple of months, like, there was a really significant change in his behavior. He wasn't expelled, he stayed at school. For the first time, just recently, when I was there in 2019, parents from outside the school area want to send their kids to the school. So it's just a really powerful kind of metaphor for the power of a garden. Amazing. They built their own dryer for herbs, and they do a lot of cool stuff there. This is a peri-urban, so we're moving on to Pluk CSA in Amsterdam. So this is a peri-urban farm, about a 25-minute bike ride from central Amsterdam out west, and you get to this 4 to 5 acre peri-urban organic farm. Actually, you guys won't see this, but Amsterdam is really interesting. Like, it's got a coastal area, but it's been designed, intentionally designed, in this kind of shape. And the idea being that no matter where you are, or matter where you live in Amsterdam, within 20 minutes on a bike, you can get to the countryside. So it's, and that was done intentionally by way of urban planning way back in the day. So yeah, 25 minutes, lovely bike ride to this farm. Operates as a CSA, has about 100 members, and they come in and they can pick produce 3 days a week. So they pick the produce, and there's a board where the gardeners there write down what they can pick and how much based on what's coming on available. They have a market garden area. They have a lot of berries. They have a lot of fruit trees. It sits right next to a really fancy cafe and organic shop. And they juice a lot of the fruit, pears in particular, and sell the pear juice out of the organic shop. They get a lot of volunteers who just come there and help out because they just love being there. It employs three full-time growers on a small living wage. And, you know, it's widely acknowledged in the Netherlands that this kind of work is not well paid. So they invite people in the CSA to pay on a sliding scale and pay more to support the growers if you can afford it. This does operate profitably and independent of any grant funding. And here you get a good view of the berry garden area and one of the tunnel houses. So that's It's great how within a 25-minute bike ride from central Amsterdam, you can have access to fresh organic fruit and veg and not at exorbitant prices. This is another project in Netherlands. This is in Almere, and Almere is interesting because it has a really high refugee population, particular people from Africa. So in 2012, a flower grower, Ron, he was facing reduced returns due to competition from imported Chinese flowers. He was looking at going out of business. So came up with an ingenious business plan for these glass houses, and there's 3 of them, and they're massive. So he set up a community garden inside the glass houses, 3 by 4 meter plots. Ron supplies water. He supplies compost, some building materials. I think you pay extra for them. He does pest control inside the glass house. All growing must be done using organic principles. And he provides a shop at the entrance to the first glass house where people can sell excess produce. Now, it's really popular with migrant refugee communities because these glass houses get really hot and they can grow food from their native countries, which they couldn't otherwise grow. Things like anchoeta and betawari, I have no idea what they are. Bitter melon, I know, just about consumed my garden a few years ago. And these are the luscious community gardens I saw anywhere in Europe. I'm of course helped by the fact that it's under glass, but what's really cool is that people cooperate. So someone with a plot here will be growing lots of tomatoes, someone will be growing lots of corn, and they're constantly swapping and making little deals and arrangements to grow things for each other. Yeah, so that was an interesting, different, really creative business. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I put that in. So Ron, he conducts pest control in glass houses, and you'll probably know whitefly, which is a problem not just in glass houses. Incarcia formosa is a biological control for whitefly. It's a little parasitic wasp, and that's just one of the examples of one of the biological controls he uses in the glass house. So I was actually up in Netherlands. I was in Amsterdam, and I interviewed an urban planner from The Hague, and I talked to gardeners in Amsterdam, and I had several people say to me, you should go to Marseille. And I was like, really? Yeah, I'd love to go to Marseille, but it's only 3,000 kilometers in the other direction. I was heading to the UK, so it's like a 10-hour high-speed train ride. Yeah. But I listened, and I did. I booked a ticket and I went down there. Now, I saw a couple of projects there, a couple of really inspiring projects. This one here is called Le Paysan Urbain, the urban peasant. And this chap here on the right, actually this chap here on the left was my tour guide for a day, Guillaume. And he was actually one of the agronomists on the expert team that assessed sites in Paris for the Parisculteurs project. He's written a book on urban agriculture, but it's in French, can't read it. The guy on the right here, so he's the guy who set up Le Paysan Urbain, and he originally set up a site in Paris, which was really successful. So he's come down to Marseille and he set up another site in Marseille. Now, it's a micro green operation, microgreens, flowers and herbs. And this site is on the grounds of a Catholic monastery, beautiful old building. No, they inhabit the site in exchange for a really small token rent. The deal is that they help maintain the grounds in the monastery. And the monastery has a fine dining restaurant called Le Cloître. And so they sell the microgreens into the fine dining restaurant as well as restaurants all over Marseille. So it's a real win-win. But what these guys are doing, so this project here is what's called social insertion in France. And urban agriculture is basically the means by which a social program can operate. So they are taking disadvantaged youth, troubled youth, and teaching them horticulture, business skills, administration, and they have a carpentry area on site. They teach them building skills as well. They actually employ a social worker part-time to help disadvantaged youth into stable housing, because that's often a real issue as well. What else can I tell you? The government, so they're in partnership with government. Government pays a salary of youth for a maximum of 2 years. And the ongoing funding is somewhat dependent on youth finding stable employment at the other end. So they've had quite a lot of funding from banks and insurance companies who have these funds available for urban agriculture projects. And you get this a lot in Europe. These big infrastructure companies, these big banks, and all these funding streams that we just don't have here to the same degree by any means. The farm had just been operating for 6 months while I was there, but they're already earning 4,000 to 5,000 euro per month, and they're adding a second big tunnel house with the aim of up to 10,000 euro a month. So that's Le Paysan Urbain. I also went to another urban farm in Marseille called l'Ételu, which was a really interesting place. It's a 1 hectare farm on a brownfield site. And, well, you can read it there. L'Ételu is an old wasteland transformed into an associative urban farm designed as an open air laboratory for ecological transition. Oh, yeah, but that's on their website. So I met Carl, another Carl, who found the site. Now, Carl doesn't have a background in horticulture, he has a background in business. And it took him 2 years to find the sites. Really hard in Marseille to find sites that aren't under pressure from residential development and are available for urban agriculture projects. This is in the edge of a residential and the edge of a industrial area. So it means they can kind of do things that you couldn't do if you're really in a residential area. When he took over the site, he negotiated with the municipality, because this site used to be for temporary housing for migrant workers working on large-scale roading projects for 70 years. So when they took over the site, it hadn't been used for that for a while. It was full of broken rubble and concrete. And I forget how many trucks he told me of stuff they took away out of here, but it's massive. They had to clear the site of all the broken rubble, etc. Signed a 6-year lease initially on base next to no money, I believe. And the soil is actually 1.5 meters higher now than it was in 2016, so they've had to build it up. It's a really interesting mix of things. Marseille is a bit like the Wild West in France. Like, it's a really edgy place. It's a lot of fun, kind of dangerous, but you know, not really. Well, I just loved it. I was just there 4 days, but it doesn't enjoy the same kind of funding from councils and government that richer cities like Lyon and Paris do. So the attitude in Marseille is, well, you do it yourself or it doesn't happen, sort of thing. What they do have in Marseille is this thing called association. And so you can put your project under this association banner. And what that does is it gives you tax breaks and other things you can do that helps fill the void that the lack of funding creates. So they have 1,500 people as part of their association. They're all paying €6 a year each. In fact, you have to be part of the, so I'm part of the association. I had to join just to go along to an evening dinner. So you have to be part of the association to sort of be part of the farm. They have 116 raised beds, more now, in community gardens, little 1 by 1 meter plots that they rent for €1 a week. And they've expanded into another hectare next door now, I believe, and they were going to build 100 more because there's such high demand. They run a lot of workshops, but like, pardon me, but like the last one, Les Paysans Urbains, they work with, well, they don't work with disadvantaged youth, but they work with long-term unemployed. So it's another kind of, this is kind of operating part commercially and as a kind of social funding. They have anywhere up to 10 people employed or engaged at a time on the farm, all moving between different roles. I forget how many of them are long-term unemployed, I think like 5 or 6. And government pays roughly €500 a month to these people, and Litalu has to come up with €100 a month. So they're teaching them vocational skills in horticulture, and actually their program's only 6 months long. They have a kitchen run by refugees. So every couple of evenings a week in summer, you can go along and you have a meal. 50% of the food comes from the farm, 50% is brought in, and they sell beer. And beer is actually a very profitable part of this farm. So they sell. See, I went along to a night and had a meal. You could buy beer. They have a DJ operating. So they do this quite frequently in summer. It's really popular. Yeah, it's a really tenacious, interesting, different farm. And I think they can get away with the noise because they're on the edge of this industrial area. So I've mentioned that. You can see sitting areas. They have a little pond. They have composting toilets. They have €200,000 every year between 2016 and 19 in external funding, but that includes the wage subsidy that the long-term unemployed get. So that's Litalu. Just a couple of pictures to go now. This is an interesting one. This was on the edge of kind of West Paris. And it's a organization called Upcycle who's really interested in a circular economy, particularly in relation to the recycling of organic food waste. So they recycle 20 tons of coffee grounds every month, might be more now, from restaurants in West Paris. They take the coffee grounds, they mix them with wood chips, and they put them through a pasteurizing machine. And it was the only thing I wasn't allowed to photograph when I was there because they poured so much money and research into this big, crazy steampunk looking machine that I saw in this room. So I couldn't photograph it, commercial sensitivity, but they put the mixture through this machine, it cooks it. And then out the other end, the mixture gets impregnated with oyster mushroom mycelium. Then the mixture with the mycelium goes into plastic bags, and the bags go for 2 weeks into a temperature-controlled dark room with high humidity. And when I went into that room, I had to wear a lab coat and a mask. It's really important at that stage in the process that there's no cross-contamination with other fungi. But after 2 weeks, it comes out of that room, goes into another room, and the lights turn on, the humidity's reduced, cuts are made in the bag, and the oyster mushroom feed on the mycelium. The oyster mushroom mycelium feed on cellulose and the wood chips and coffee grounds and burst out of the cuts in the bags. As you can see there, they get about 2 harvests per bag before the quality of the mushrooms decline and they have to throw the mixture out. Well, they don't throw the mixture out, actually. They bag it up and they sell it to local organic farms because it has quite a good nutritional composition, but it has to be ploughed in or it forms a hard crust on the surface of the soil. Now, they were experimenting when I was there because, as you can imagine, there's quite a lot of plastic waste for these bags, which they don't like. And they're experimenting when I was there, and I haven't followed up to see where they're at with this on biodegradable plastic bags. But the initial experiments, because the bags are made of cellulose, the mushrooms were just eating the bags. So last I heard, they were experimenting with thicker bags and trying to see if they could get a balance. I hope they have, because that would just be fantastic. Yes, so that's La Boîte à Champignons in Paris. I went to Copenhagen after Oslo. I trained down to Copenhagen and to visit Østergro, which is a rooftop farm in Copenhagen's Climate Vata, which is a climate resilient neighborhood. Now, it wasn't originally a climate resilient neighbor. In 2007, this neighborhood was subject to a massive adverse rainfall event. And there just simply was not enough green space and were not enough stormwater mitigation strategies to prevent the entire neighborhood from flooding. So they had massive damage. After it, the council provided incentives for people to create rooftop farms to help slow and mitigate that rapid movement of rain to the stormwater system. They've created a lot of stormwater gardens and right through the neighborhood, and you can see as you walk through. But a couple of local organic growers started Østergro. Now, this is actually on a building which used to be an open air exhibition space for luxury cars. So you go inside this lift that you can drive a car inside, and they used to drive cars out on here. So obviously no loading issues for this building. And it was designed to kind of mimic a much larger farm with permacultural techniques and strips of companion plants, et cetera, et cetera. But there's a whole lot of stuff going on here. It operates as a CSA with 40 families, and kids come up and run around and they garden once a week. But there's no way there's enough food here to supply the families. They operate in combination with a big organic farm outside Copenhagen. They bring food in for the orders from them. But the backbone of the Østergro economy is these buildings here, which house a bespoke restaurant called Gross Spiserie. So for 2 evenings a week through summer, and I think summer, spring and autumn, they have a fine dining experience. So they have like a 5:30 sitting and an 8 p.m. sitting. They can sit 25 people on a 6-course menu. It's Nordic style food with fresh ingredients. And they only use 10% of the produce from the rooftop in the meals. It's quite a common misconception. People come along and think, oh, it all comes from the rooftop. And they're like, actually, no, it doesn't. So part of their mission is to educate people about where food comes from, the space it takes and energy and time, etc. it takes to grow food organically. So they do that 20-minute session before every sitting. In a couple of months of the year, actually, this is completely under snow. So that it shuts down. I think only in February it shuts down. As you can see, the long table people sit at. There's the gardens around the side. They have a little fire pit. So it's a commercial operation. It doesn't have any external funding. In full season, Østergro employs 4 people in the office or gardens, 4 full-time chefs, 1 part-time chef, 1 part-time front of house and 1 intern, and 1 person to manage the CSA at 80% of full-time. They've also developed a real niche area as a venue hire for weddings. A lot of workshops and school visits as well. So it's quite a successful business model. They received quite a bit of startup funding from the Copenhagen Council, 1,000 New Zealand dollars on 2 separate grants. But they got good grants from Real Dania, which is a investment fund with billions of dollars in real estate that has money available for innovative architectural projects. That is Instagram. So I'm just going to finish in Germany, in a city just outside Frankfurt called Darmstadt. And mine put me on to a woman there who's involved in the passive house movement in Germany. She lives in Darmstadt. She's part of an urban farming group. There are 2 urban farming groups in Darmstadt. And she gave me a tour for a day. Now, these groups do small-scale projects that are raising awareness about food production and supply, etc. One project, so there's 3 projects there. I'll just take you through them. The one here on the top left. So that's a vertical garden at a cafe in one of the biggest, most central popular parks in Darmstadt. And in spouting, they grow rare and unusual herbs. So this is irrigated, it's hanging on stainless cables, it's lit up at night. They do small working bees on it every Sunday. And the cafe uses the herbs in cooking in the cafe. So that was one. That was the vertical gardens at Herrngarten Cafe. Another one here in the lower left is a project with the Opera House. There's a beautiful Opera House in Darmstadt. House supplied materials, and the other urban gardening group, Initiative Edible Darmstadt, built the beds. And what they do in Darmstadt, because there is so much, this intensive kind of housing and not a lot of garden space for people to grow food. With these projects, they approach local people in local flats, and they ask them if they want to be involved in helping maintain and look after the garden beds, involved in the project. And they inevitably always get 1 or 2 people who are keen. And so it's a really neat way of involving people who don't have garden space necessarily to be involved. And this really quirky one, which I just love, which is in one neighborhood of Darmstadt, it's where they have just made different quirky pots and stuck them on bollards and all through the neighborhood. And they really didn't know how this would go. People would hate them and love them, and people just love it. It's really whimsical. It makes people laugh. They found that they need a lot of water, these pots in summer, and they're finding that they don't need to water them because locals are just coming out and watering them all the time. So a little bit of a learning summary. Collaborations, the Europeans are really good at. I mean, I don't know if it's because they have such a long history of dense populations in these urban areas. They've learnt to work together through having a lot of adversity and social problems over the years, but they do this really well. Business, private enterprise, government, councils, growers, fantastic. Diversity, there was a consistent thread, a real diversity of activities in a lot of these farms to make them economically viable. And you'd really commonly see hospitality as being an integral part of that. Social insertion, this idea of social urban farming being a vessel through which a social program can operate, was also a really common theme. Top down, bottom up, just the contrast between Andernach, like a top down municipal approach to growing food in public spaces, versus Todmorden, which is grassroots bottom up. Interesting that Todmorden was the most vibrant, joyful, alive project I visited. And something I haven't mentioned, art and culture. So this is something you see a lot in these urban farms in Europe. I didn't talk about this project. It's another one I visited, Zone Sensible on the edge of Paris. It's quite a large permaculture / organic farm where they have a lot of sculpture and they do a lot of open air theatre. So that invites in people who are more drawn to the cultural, theatrical aspect, but at the same time they get to learn a bit about growing food and how an organic farm operates. And finally, succession, this clever way that Pucht in Antwerp is dealing with this issue of, one main person leaves and the project falls over. So we're passing on skills. So in conclusion, in New Zealand, we don't have the same types of population pressure that they have in Europe or lack of green space. But what we do have is problems related to poverty, food security, poor nutrition, 5th highest carbon footprint in the OECD, issues with food waste and resultant emissions, and access to land on which to grow food. And I haven't even touched on the mental health issues we have in New Zealand. And I don't know if you've seen recent studies which show that gardening, hands in soil, microbes in soil have just the equivalent effect to antidepressants, if you like. And I want to touch on Todmorden again and the effect it's had on policy and planning. So Corderdale Council is the borough in which Todmorden sits. And due to the influence of Incredible Edible Todmorden in 2017, they have adopted policy specific to residential developments, which now requires developers to allocate and consider areas for community food growing in their developments into landscaping schemes. And Northern Roots, which is a proposed eco park near Bolton, Manchester. Bolton's a low socioeconomic town with a big green belt through the middle of it. And there's a £25 million project that's underway at the moment. It's been called the Eden of the North, which is a combination of urban farms, microbreweries, mountain biking tracks, eco weddings, glamping, all this stuff. I was going to go there and do some work with these guys last year, but that didn't happen. Now I want to just go back and finish on, if I can go back. It's protesting. Just like, yep. So I'm going to finish on this. I was listening to Jesse on Afternoons in RNZ a few weeks ago, and I heard this interview with a Russian author, science journalist Marta Zaraska, who's written a book called Growing Young, How Friendship, Optimism and Kindness Can Help You Live to 100. So she's got all these statistics on loneliness affecting gene chromosomes and training diet's good for you, but it's actually also about eating food with people, because you notice it in Europe and France in particular, people don't generally eat alone, like it's just a social thing to eat together. But one really interesting meta-analysis of study, that's a whole bunch of studies thrown together and results plucked out, was that diet and exercise can reduce mortality by 20 to 30%, but social cohesion, being surrounded by friends, connected to community, etc., can reduce your mortality risk by 45%. So yeah, and that's where I end the talk. Yeah. I think at this point we throw it open to questions. If you have any questions, shoot. I'm just going to have a drink of water. Oh.
Mind blowing, literally. She's a gardener, but also she's a clinical psychologist, and she's visited all these gardens around Europe and America. And yeah, the findings are incredible. And she's got heaps of really cool research. So her name is Sue Stewart-Smith, if you're interested. It's hot off the press.
Great.
Published last year, I think.
Great. So will Zoom people hear that? The
no.
well-gardened mind by
Sue Stewart-Smith.
Sue Stewart-Smith. Yeah. Cool.
Halfway through.
Great. Yes.
Very practical question.
Yeah.
You spoke about the waste and the movement supports. Have you investigated here in New Zealand the waste that we can get?
Yeah, no, I have not. I haven't had, I haven't been involved in, yeah.
Could you repeat the question for the people?
Oh, yes. Good point. So the question was, have I been involved in any analysis of weight loading on roofs here in New Zealand? And the simple answer is no. But I'm sure someone has. Would depend on the building, yeah. The Waitakere green roofs and
That you were talking about. So
yeah, and they use the clay balls. I'm repeating everything here now so you can hear it. The clay balls, yeah. Okay. Yes.
I have two questions.
Yes.
I'll just ask one and then ask my other one after. With the Todd water example, and you were talking about being bottom up and that people were voluntary, did they say anything about how they managed that? Like how those two people maintained their motivation? Because something that happens a lot here is that it's just not sustainable and those people burn out. So, I mean, are they really wealthy and so they can give their time freely, or are they paying a salary, or do you have any insights about that?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. So that was in Todmorden. To the people who sort of have held it, Mary, Claire, and Pamela, are they? How are they able to sustain that financially, etc.? I can't answer that in full. I didn't probe that deeply on their kind of, but it's very much a part-time kind of thing. I know that, so Mary and Pamela, Mary is still living in Todmorden and holding that whole volunteer, no monetary kind of emphasis input, whereas Pamela, I believe, went on a different kind of journey and more involved in public speaking and getting other projects going, perhaps. I'm not really answering your question, and it's probably because I don't really know. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Oh, sorry, you're the second. So, yeah.
Is that you sound okay? Any questions?
Kia ora, Carl. Thank you very much. A lot of the examples you showed us were of more dense urban areas in Europe. So I'm wondering what insights you can share with us about what models you think work for the Tamaki Makaurau suburban sprawl, particularly in relation to top-down versus bottom-up, social, art and culture, those kinds of findings that you found. What are your hunches about what will work in the suburban sprawl of Auckland?
Well, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, I have been doing some thinking about this, like in terms of the urban context here. So we are, with so much infill housing, we are heading towards more intensification in terms of the urban context. So, and that I absolutely see a role for urban agriculture spaces to be set aside for people to be able to garden, because I mean, I just constantly get developers sending me plans for houses that are just squeezed onto tiny spaces with no space for actually food growing. I'm starting to do some work with, I think I mentioned Whare Waiatea Marae. Now their community has major issues with health problems like diabetes. So I think in areas where that's an issue, that sort of thing's an issue, there's a real opportunity to make an impact in terms of healthy kai. you know, which they're already doing on their marae. They're just not growing their own gardens. They're getting produce in, but now they want to start growing their own gardens. You know, and just generalized stuff like social cohesion, like with why we often have such an independent way of being these days in the world, that there's often such opportunities to connect. It's not always about just growing food. Does that somewhat answer the question? Yeah. Some thoughts anyway. Yeah. Yes.
I've got two questions. So the first question is, of all the projects you saw, was there any mention of biodynamic methods being used? I see organics is highlighted as the preferred method, but like for me, biodynamics is that next niche towards top quality food, soil, as well as the social movement, like CSA came out of Rudolf Steiner's economic model. Second question is related to the soil procession. And I just wonder, in the Auckland context, like imagine if we wanted 100 urban farms in the foe. If you think there's a potential for like small scale gardeners, apartment dwellers to keep their food waste, keep their green waste, make soil, and then kind of bring it to contribute to a new project, like is there anything like that happening? Where you know, people who aren't gardening can be soil makers and be part of that success.
Yeah, did I see anything like that? I may have, and I may have forgotten it, but I don't think I
from what you
did.
saw, would
Yeah.
be relevant in
Oh.
Aotearoa.
Well, 100%. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I suppose there's if you have organic certification, you can have issues with bringing stuff into a certified farm. That can be a problem. I know Kalmana's got a compost hub going now where they're bringing, they're getting waste from local restaurants and households, and they're composting on site where they control the process.
In the soil factory.
Yeah, in the soil factory, yeah. But I think it's a great idea, actually. Yeah. Hands full. Yeah.
And the biodynamics?
Oh, yeah. No, there was some mention of biodynamics. Yeah. Not as much as, not that much really, which is interesting considering it emerged out of Europe. And
France, Germany?
a little bit in Germany and France. Yep. Yep. And I think they put the preparations on in Todmorden as well. But just there was some mention. It wasn't major emphasis though. No. No. Yeah. Anyone else?
That garden in Germany was doing the 100 tomatoes variety per year.
Yeah.
Is there a goal to that? Like
Sorry.
yeah, sure. There was a garden in Germany that's doing 100 tomatoes variety per year and 100 beets per year, and having a special goal every year. Is there like a scientific goal? Are they studying like variety that works better in urban environments, selecting some groups?
Yeah, my understanding is that they were taking heritage varieties specific to their region, so their geographic region. I don't know how broad that was, and that maybe weren't commonly grown anymore, weren't widely available, and they're growing those to raise awareness. I didn't look into whether they were actually looking deeply into nutritional content of those varieties and that, but they certainly were making like niche products, chutneys and etc., using it and emphasizing that they're from heritage varieties. So that was happening. Yeah.
Kia ora, bro. That was really interesting. I was wondering what role you noticed across the different projects what role there was for community ownership and participation in that space. You know, like, were people empowered to choose? Obviously, if you've got like your little plot, you can choose, but in some of those bigger projects, did you see people being given agency?
Yeah, not so much. The more commercial projects, there is probably more of a separation between the commercial growing areas and people having their own community garden plots. I mean, in Putt, for example, it was much looser arrangement on the rooftop where people could garden through the rooftop in the areas that were harvested for restaurants in the city. The degree to which they got to choose the varieties, I'm not sure. I suspect that's probably more governed by the demand, not people want. And Todmorden is just, it's like, you know, whatever you got an idea, just bring it. You know, you want to grow it, grow it. Let's plant it here, let's plant it there. Yeah.
From online.
Yeah.
Great to see so many initiatives. How do you get a broader audience started? And what are some of the common objectives you hear?
How do you get a what, sorry?
How do you get a broader audience started?
Broader audience to engage with this sort of thing?
I guess so, yeah.
I don't know, like, put me on TV. It's a good question. That's a really good question. I mean, I've tried. This is the 7th presentation I've given since the kind of end of last year, and I've got another few in the next month. And that's just in the Auckland region. I've had up to 60 people turn up. I've sent it to sustainability advisors at Auckland Council, trying to engage as much as possible, really. Yeah, I'd love to take it to Wellington and Christchurch. And what was the second part of the question?
What are some common objectives you hear?
Objectives. Yeah, objectives. That's actually a good question. It varies with each project. I think if you can see in the case of Todmorden, for example, it's quite clear that it's about building community resilience through connection between people, and harmony between people. And, you know, you could see, for example, in Putt, and this is something I would love to see. So the person who asked me before about the New Zealand context, it's something I'd love to see happen here is private developers to get excited about partnering with growers and creating these kind of creative hubs where gardens and food growing is like central to it, because you can see in Putt how incredible that project is. So the objective there, you could see, was a commercial objective. Let's fill the buildings and get them leased out and make some money, but let's do it through this really inspiring rooftop farm. So I think the objectives vary. Sure, some, you know, like you saw projects where there was a motivation to help long-term unemployed, and I'm sure there's a selfish motivation from some of the people who start these projects too, and they just really enjoy it, and that's what they want to be doing, and that's cool. Yeah.
Another question from Judy. Is there any evidence of pillaging by people outside of community? What sort of security needed, have you noticed?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting question. So the rooftop gardens, you can imagine, are really proofed against that because they can lock them off. Some of the gardens, like the ones in public spaces in particular, they just accept, well, they encourage people to pick, right? I don't know if it's the German sensibility because in the sense that they haven't had any vandalism, or And like in Todmorden, the attitude is like, if people want to tear something out, let them tear it out. We'll just plant something else. In terms of some of the other ones, some of them are tucked away, you know, like the microgreen operation in the monastery. It's actually, you're entering private grounds, so you're potentially trespassing, I guess, after hours. I didn't get a lot of, I did ask the question a few times and I never had the sense that there was a huge amount of pilfering going on.
My experience, I've managed the gardens here for 15 years and we've had different variations. We have allotments and now we're sort of doing more of a combined efforts kind of thing where we have a time a week that we all come together and work on the grounds. But we are noticing, because we don't have the allotments anymore, that things are getting a bit more village. So last week our entire plum crop of our damson tree, which is very tall, vanished.
Wow.
And all of our peaches, and we're happy for the food forest to be, you know, to be picked from, but people that seem to be doing it to order. So we've started planting things that, like instead of a broccoli head, for example, we're doing sprouting broccoli, so we can't just take, you know, the whole top. So we've just changed a little bit about what we're planting, and the idea with the damson is that it's not, you know, your classic big juicy fruit. It's quite hard to gauge. You have to wait for a certain time for it to be sweet, and it's mainly for preserving. So we thought that's going to be safe, but obviously, yeah, not. And the deeper and more dense the food forest gets, the more people can kind of hide out there, you know, so it's kind of interesting.
Something just came to mind that a lot of these projects, because they have this hospitality aspect, or this, a lot of them have, I mean, there's half a dozen I haven't showed you. Some have they have hospitality restaurants attached. So people are there in the evenings and the weekends. There's a lot of passive surveillance just naturally happening. Theatre events in the gardens. So the opportunities for people to actually come when no one's there.
What we found here is that there are a lot of homeless around New Lynn, and they were moved on, and they came to Olympic Park. So for a year, it was actually a little bit dangerous to be here by yourself. And people, there's a regular guy who sleeps basically at the top of the garden. So yeah, it's an interesting one. It's a broad issue, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So and we have tried, like, there's wardens that come around and try and get people spaces to go sleep. But some people actually just want to be alone, want to be here.
Yeah, and want to be in amongst some lovely garden.
Yeah. Free food, yeah.
Can't blame them.
And lots of wild chicks that they can, wild roosters they can have, I guess. So that's another issue here, is actually rooster damage and control. And they were moved from the Mediterranean and ended up here.
Oh, wow.
So we're going to have a big cull and a whole bunch of them in here. And that's been my job, just doing massive rooster protection. So yeah, that's kind of a upward battle in some ways, yeah, we have corrections here anyway. They come and help, and I don't tend to I'm not generally around when they're around. They kind of hide out in Olympic Park. One of our long-term allotment gardeners connected with the guy who was sleeping up here, and they had quite a nice relationship, but he would get off his head quite a lot, so he was a little bit dangerous to be around. So yeah, and it's quite a high percentage of females in the staff, so we just have to be a little bit careful. Yeah.
So my question was connected in terms of applicability and something you mentioned in the line. Has anyone else taken your learnings and started trying to apply through for other urban farms around the city?
Yeah, good question. Good question.
I don't know if I'm going to so I guess related to Tamaki Kodo, whether anyone else has taken these learnings and started to try find it through applicability in Kodo?
Maybe. I know Kalman is really ramping up their forest. They are really, yeah, they're expensive, but they're popular. They're usually sold out. People have a lot of money, yeah. Yeah, yeah, Todmorden, right? Not that I'm aware of yet. I mean, I've just started sharing this, so whether everyone's picking it up and running with ideas, I'm yet to find out. Yeah, right. Cool.
And work at a couple of sites. So there's definitely people thinking about, it's definitely people starting to think about this. But, as a co-land with housing, trying to
That's really relevant on not banning more.
cool, yeah. Oh, Simon Street is definitely pushing the micro out of the Farmers Alliance, which is pretty nascent. How do you say that? It's starting out.
But maybe I should talk.
I know about that. I know about that. I was just wondering if there were any others other than.
Oh, okay. So the Urban Farmers Alliance, I know there's dozens and dozens of people trying to get projects off the ground. And it's funding, it's land, it's infrastructure, it's training. And I think this presentation needs to be seen so widely. I mean, I'm an urban farmer waiting for.
Widely also by the people who make the decisions. That's the problem. A lot of people are super passionate now, but it's all the people who have the money. That everyone needs to see it. It's not just
I mean,
types.
I'd like people in council, developers, green-minded developers to see this. We should have a presentation just for them.
I have a question here. Does Carl have social media where people can follow his work?
I'm terrible on social media. I'm actually looking for a social media manager, someone to manage my social media because, I don't have time and particularly the interest. I do have a Facebook page, which is could be improved. Yeah.
Just an associated question: is this report published anywhere, Carl?
It is not yet, but it may well be in due course. This is being recorded, so see what we can do with that. There's a longer report, 57-page report, which shows more projects and goes into more detail, which is my report for the Churchill Trust. And I'm just waiting on final approval from the Trust because I have submitted a while ago, and they're all volunteer time, so it takes them a while to get back, but that should be hopefully online really soon. And perhaps I can talk to them about getting, well, I'm completely developing my website at the moment, so I'll hopefully get a copy of this put up on there at some point. Yeah.
I think our time's up. So I just want to say a huge thank you to you. And you must be a bit exhausted giving this, but I can see you're passionate and, it's some amazing information in there that everybody acknowledges. So huge thank you to that. And thank you to everybody for attending and to our online audience as well. We're going to make this available for a couple of weeks, I think, if people want to keep booking to see it. So if you've got friends who you think really need to see it, or baptised who missed most of it, you can actually watch for a wee while yet. So that's really good. I want to say a big thank you to Anna Carey, who's been handling questions in the back and general moral support back there. She's our comms team leader. And huge thanks to Quentin Lorais, did I say that right? Who is our behind the scenes tech producer, who basically we couldn't have done this without. And I just want to put a plug in for a workshop that Carl is about to do as part of the EcoFest. EcoFest starts mid-March, ends mid-April. So 10th of April, so Saturday 10th of April, we're doing a workshop on urban food forest design and a design charrette for Olympic Park. And it's going to be 10:30 till 3, and both of us will be here working on that one. And if you want to book or have a look at any other EcoFest activities, just go to ecofest.org.nz. And Baptiste is the next urban food production person. He's sitting just behind here, and we're doing his workshop. I don't have the date here, but it's in March. 24th of March. 24th of March. Yeah. Cool. So thank you, everybody. And if you wouldn't mind doing a feedback forms as well, that'd be most appreciated. We've got a silver box just at the front, and online people, you've got an online feedback form coming your way as well. So we need that for the local board reporting, which is essential. And again, a huge thank you to the FO local board and local network for supporting this and a few other events. Thanks, everyone.